Today we're going to be making sourdough. And one important part of sourdough is maintaining the sourdough culture, the sourdough starter. You get to give the sourdough starters a pet, like a chicken. It provides nice things for us to eat, but it has to be fed and kept well. I have two sourdough cultures that I keep separately. They're the same thing. I'm just worried that if one of them runs into trouble, that I've got a spare. You can see that the sourdough starter looks sort of soupy and sticky. It doesn't really look like dough. I'm going to put about a quarter cup of sourdough starter into this bowl. This is going to be for culture 1. I'm speeding things up. Another quarter cup into bowl number 2. Into each of the bowls, and again, you only really need to maintain one culture. I'm just playing things safe with 2. I'm going to add 1/2 cup of water. That's a 1/2 cup there. And another 1/2 cup for culture number 2. I'm making the new starter that I'm going to have for the next week. Each week, the starter has to be fed, just like your chicken, and anything that is not put into this bowl is technically discarded, but we're of course going to do something with that discard. Right now, I'm dissolving, really just suspending all of the little sourdough starter in water, and I'm making something that has sort of the consistency of milk. You can still see it's a little bit lumpy. You don't have to break up every single lump. So far I've put in 1/4 cup of starter, 1/2 cup of water. Now I'm going to put in 1 full cup of flour after cleaning up a little bit. The food for the sourdough starter is all-purpose flour. Now when I make bread, I sometimes use different sorts of flours, like bread flour. But for the sourdough starter, to give it its food, I'm going to use 1 cup of all-purpose flour. I'm going to mix it with a fork, and it doesn't have to be perfect. I just want to develop this sort of lumpy, sticky, I don't really want to call it dough because it's really not dough. It is the fed sourdough, and the consistency is not going to be smooth. It's not going to look like what is in the stainless steel bowl on the right. It's going to look like this sort of sticky, sort of consistency of oatmeal, but sticky sort of thing. We'll speed up the video a little bit, but we're going to do the same thing with the other bowl. Now we have 2 well-fed colonies of sourdough. We're going to cover these with plastic wrap and set them aside. I'm going to leave these newly fed colonies of sourdough at room temperature for the rest of the day today. I want you to notice their texture now. They're not going to look quite like this, but they're going to look a lot more soupy by the end of the day. Okay, what do we do with the discard? If you're a sourdough purist, you're not going to like what I am doing. People make an active sourdough with a few different steps from what's left of the discard. I'm actually just going to cook with the discard, and trust me, it's going to come out just fine. So I've put the remainder of the sourdough starter into my stand mixer. This is all the stuff minus the 1/4 cup that we use to feed to make our new colony. I've just put in 2 cups of water, and I'm going to mix it with the stand mixer until it is sort of milky, and again, it's okay if it's got a few lumps. It's not a big deal. I'm going to go ahead and speed up this video a little bit too. Okay, it has reached the consistency that we want, sort of uniform, a few little lumps. Now I'm going to add flour. You saw me put in 2 cups of water. I'm going to start out with 4 cups of flour sifted into the 2 cups of water. Now, this was the ratio that we used to feed our sourdough. Again, I'm speeding things up a little bit. And I've put on the little plastic guards on the side because it's going to get messy. And the sort of dough that we formed is really far too loose. I'm going to add another 2 cups of flour. So now we have got 2 cups of water and a total of 6 cups of flour. And this is going to give me the consistency that I want. Okay, let's slow things back down to regular speed now. The sourdough dough that we formed now, we're going to continue to mix, and you see it's starting to pull off of the side of the bowl. The side of the bowl is starting to look clean, and the dough is starting to look more rubbery. This is the gluten that is being beaten up in the kneading process, and I'm really happy for stand mixers because this would be really a pain to do by hand. Let's go ahead and speed this segment up too. Now we're going to transfer our dough to a greased bowl, and I want you to see the dough is sticky. This is much stickier than the bread dough that you're probably used to working with, but it does come off of the hook cleanly. We're going to transfer the sticky dough to a well-greased bowl for its first proofing. So I'm taking it out, and it's definitely sticky, but it comes off pretty cleanly from the mixing bowl. Just dump it in there. Sticky. We're going to cover it with tin foil and put it in a warm place. In this case, I'm putting it in my oven, which I've made just a little bit warmer than room temperature. Of course, the oven is not on as I'm putting it in. I'm actually making 2 sourdough things today. The first one is bread, which you've seen me make. The other one is going to be pizza, and I really like the pizza dough flavoring mix from King Arthur flour. It's a combination of Parmesan and garlic and onion powder, and if you don't have this, you can mix grated Parmesan, onion powder and garlic powder and a little bit of salt and add that to your dough too. It's really nice for pizza. And as you see, I'm putting in 2 really heaping soup spoonfuls of this into a lot of dough. We've let the dough proof for about 3 hours now, and we are preparing for our second proofing. I'm taking the dough out of the bowl. I don't think it's quite doubled in volume. Maybe it's 1.5 times the size. The sourdough does not rise very quickly. But you can see it's gotten considerably stickier and soupier. It's not holding together in the way that it was. My board on which I am rolling it out is more than just well floured. There's a lot of flour there, and I'm doing that not only to prevent the dough from sticking, but because I want to now incorporate some of that flour into the dough. And I'm going to knead it, and I'm going to knead and knead and knead. I'm going to speed this section up a little bit. The dough now has gotten considerably more rubbery. I can poke it and it bounces back. It's a joy to feel. Now I'm going to put it back into the greased bowl, and it's going to do its second proofing. This time I want to see it get considerably larger, and I'm going to let it go maybe another 2 hours. About 4 hours has passed since we put in our bread for our second proofing. That's a little longer than I usually go, but that's how the schedule worked out today. I've preheated my oven to 500, and I let it achieve the temperature of 500 and then went another half hour to let the pot heat up too. This is a Dutch oven pot, and I have my dough, which has more than doubled in size. I dump it into the pot. I'm going to shake it around in order to level things out. And I'm going to take a knife and I'm going to slit it, and I'm going to really cut it pretty deeply. And here we go. Now, here is a special piece of equipment, which is that we're going to use a food-grade sprayer, and we're just spraying water all over the surface of the dough. We're going to cover it up with the lid of our Dutch oven, carefully because it's very hot. And we're going to put it back in the oven, and we're going to let it cook at 500 for 15 minutes. There you go, 500. In the meantime, we're going to get a look at our pizza dough that has also risen very substantially. And it's very sticky. Now, the pizza dough can't just be dumped in the same way that the bread dough was. So we're going to have to toss this with a little bit more flour. I'm not going to work the dough very much because I want to maintain the little air pockets in it to the extent that I can. I'm going to be squeezing some of them out. But for right now, I'm not going to really pound this dough. I'm going to make sure that it's nicely covered in flour just so that it's not sticky. And then I'm going to cut off a section of the dough. Now here's a little pro tip. I'm not going to stretch the dough the way that regular pizza dough is. This dough is way too sticky and it'll just tear apart if you try to do that. I'm also not going to roll it out on my board. I'm going to put it directly on parchment paper, and I'm going to roll it out on the parchment paper. I'm going to get it very, very thin, and because of its stickiness and its thinness, it's really impossible to transfer from a board once you've stretched it out. That's why we're going to roll it directly onto the parchment paper. We're going to get it very, very thin, and we're going to let it proof just one more time for about an hour, just so that it can get a little bit of loft and make a nice pizza dough. So this is going to be the end of our pizza story. Now, here are the sourdoughs that we fed at the start of the day. And you'll remember that they looked all lumpy and sort of oatmeal-y before. Now they're all bubbly, and they're very, very thin in the same way that our sourdough starter was before. I'm going to put them back into the pots from which they came, and then those pots are going to go into the refrigerator. And then into the fridge they go for another week, after which time I'll take them out and feed them again. "15 minutes has passed, and I'm going to take the lid off of my Dutch oven. I've turned the oven down to 450 now, and I'm going to again liberally spray both the baking bread and also the whole inside of the oven with water. Now, this moisture is going to give the bread a nice hard crust. I know it's not what you would think. You'd think it would steam it and make it softer, but that's not how it works. I'm also going to be monitoring the temperature of the bread. I'm looking for an internal temperature of about 190. Once I reach that, we're going to take the bread out, and it is beautiful. And I'm going to put it on a little cooling rack, and there you have sourdough bread.